I don't know about you, but I have a lot on my plate. And because I have a lot on my plate, I often get overwhelmed, overworked, and I don't have enough rest in my life. Well, today I'm interviewing a very special friend. His name is Steve Watkins, and he has an actual test that you can take to examine if you have chronic rest deficit. He has an incredible journey, a story that I know you are going to find to be so impactful. So if you have a problem resting because you've got too much on your plate, this is the message for you. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, Fearless family. It is Fearless Tuesday, and you know what that means. I've got a new Fearless friend with me today. His name is Steve Watkins, and we share arguably maybe the world's greatest literary agent of all time.
No question about it.
She's amazing, Mary DeMuth. So Steve and I got to meet each other because we're both represented by Mary. And it's just been a really cool journey to get to know you, Steve, and find out your story. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to jump right in because you've got some great stuff to share. And we've only got 20 minutes. Is that all right?
It is. I've got to say this one thing first, though, Christy. This is very important. Where can I get a Fearless Woman t-shirt? Because if there's one thing I am, it's a fearless woman, right? Yes.
All right. Well, Cassie, I'm sure you're going to be watching at some point. She's our merch director. We got to get Steve some Fearless merch. I'm so pumped about that, Steve. That's great. So you've been a follower of Jesus since like 17 years old, and you've got your normal ups and downs like all of us. But, I think some people think that when you're a follower of Jesus, then maybe you just don't have trials anymore, right? And just everything is peachy and perfect. But you actually had a rock bottom moment, kind of like mine in 2011 with my nervous breakdown when you were 40 years old. And there was a moment where Jesus actually came to you in a vision and prevented you from taking your life. What a story to begin with, Steve. Can you walk us through that rock bottom moment and tell us about that vision?
I hadn't thought about that in a while, Christy. It's actually, I have tried in my own mind and my own heart to characterize that moment many times. And beyond a vision, I think of it really as a holy moment. One of the very few holy moments in my life. And I'm one of those guys. I've taken every personality profile in the business. I'm type A, high D. I'm one of those driven guys who loves to do things and loves to work at things. And obviously I'm a creative person and I love to create. And I had just had an incredible life of success in business and success in a lot of the things I had done. And suddenly, one day in my early 40s, I found myself divorced after a 19-year marriage. I had lost a business that I loved. It was a small publishing business, and literally went from everything's great to the next day, really honestly not knowing how groceries would get bought the next day. It was in the middle of the 2008 recession. I had tried to upstart another business, and it was just a very difficult time. And I'm one of those guys who has always just been able to power through, whatever it was, just able to power through it. But for the next 3 years, as you said, I found myself in this really, really difficult place. I had all kinds of thoughts. I had thoughts about, as you mentioned, my own life. And as much as anything, it was difficult because I could not see tomorrow. I had no idea what tomorrow was going to bring. Fell asleep one day. I was just, and I didn't even really sleep that well during those 3 years. But it was, it was a vision. It was a holy moment, whatever you want to call it. And I won't go into all the details of that because it's there are a lot of details to it. But it was Jesus. In fact, when it happened, I didn't talk to anyone about it for several years. because, and this may sound silly, it was so real that I couldn't put words to it. And I'm a word guy, right? I couldn't describe what had happened. It was, and to this day, it was the most real experience that I ever had when literally I was in the arms of Jesus. He wipes his arm across a piece of slate. Slate is significant to my story, and basically said, "You're forgiven. All is well. I need you to stick around." But backing up, well, actually not backing up, moving forward to that, the only thing I had to do during those several years, I'm a travel guy. I love to travel. I love to go places. I love to do things. I love to learn about the world. And my wife and I would, we'd watch Anthony Bourdain on television, or we'd watch House Hunters International. And we just always kind of held on to that dream of a brighter day someday. It sounds kind of trivial, but I came across a movie on Netflix one night called The Way. It has Martin Sheen in it, and it's about an ancient Christian pilgrimage in Spain. And to make a long story short, I watched the 2 hours of that movie. The credits rolled, and I wept as the credits rolled. I may cry just thinking about it right now, but I wept as those credits rolled, and I knew where I was headed. I was headed to Spain to go on pilgrimage. There was a point about a year or a year and a half later where I was beginning to come out of that depression. I was just beginning to see the light again. I didn't know where it was all headed. So I went to Spain, went on pilgrimage, walked 500 miles in 40 days. That pilgrimage actually concludes in a Spanish town called Santiago de Compostela, at a cathedral where it is believed the remains of St. James, the apostle of Jesus, are buried today. And pilgrims have been making that trek for a millennia. Went on that experience as God would have it. There was no, as I walked into the square, the final steps, there was no grand epiphany. There was no magical moment telling me what was next. So I came home back to Arkansas, and I did the only thing I knew to do. I began to write. And through the process of writing, that was a second pilgrimage, honestly. I published my first book. That, as circumstance would have it, it ended up with a national speaking tour at the store called REI across the country. I spoke the next year at about 63 REIs from the Potomac to Los Angeles. And it's all led to the moment you mentioned earlier, where you and I have kind of joined together on Team Mary with books and such. And it has all resulted in really and truly finding my purpose and finding my calling again. And I've got a great peace about life, and just consider myself one of the most blessed guys you can imagine.
Steve, what an incredible journey of pain turning into purpose. Mm-hmm. And for friends watching now that are catching the replay later, you might be in the middle of some darkness that Steve talked about. 2008, he lost his marriage. He lost his job, and it seems like a job that he loved and had a lot of passion in as well. So Steve, talk to the gentleman or the fearless friend here that is battling depression and anxiety. And what are some things that you did during that time, other than just leaving the country, right? Not everybody can leave the country, but what are some things that you did to work through your depression and anxiety?
Well, here's what depression is. And my wife and my mom are responsible for helping me come through that depression. And it's funny that, I'm 55 now, but in my mid 40s, during that time, I would just call my mom because I needed to hear her voice. And I'll never forget that frequently she would say, and I would get so mad at her for saying this, but she was right in what she said. She said, son, you've forgotten who you are. And that's what depression is. And that's how the enemy works. He steals our identity and makes the truth, God's truth, in a way, I think kind of puts it behind a fog. It's hard for us to see. What I would do, and this is consistent with, I think, God's design for how he put me together. I'm one of those people who, and that's why the depression was so difficult, especially during that time of economic recession, right? Because I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what tomorrow held. So I had to really get proactive in my life about things that I could, I could physically take a calendar, right? And block out a weekend here or a time here. Okay, this is something I'm going to go do, or this is a project that I'm going to be working on then. I'm one of those people who, and I think that's fairly common among any, I think it would be helpful to anyone, have something to anticipate, something to work toward. People say some silly things to to others who are depressed sometimes, like, oh, just get over it, or just, find something to do. Well, it's not that easy. But think, my advice is to think about things that you do enjoy, things that you can work toward, things that you can anticipate. And I mean, even if it's just a movie that you love, pull it out, throw it in the DVD, and just, sit there and watch it.
Steve, your mom is incredibly wise.
Yeah.
And we even had someone say, moms say the best things in our lives. And it's very, very true. But she said something so profound that I think that we're all just need to tap into. But son, you have forgotten who you are. How did you find who you were, Steve? How did you find you weren't about the success, and your purpose obviously wasn't in your relationships. How did you finally get to the point where you found out who you were?
Well, certainly coming back from pilgrimage and sitting down and writing, and I didn't even really know what I was writing, Christy. I'm a journalist, but I'm a 30-year journalist by education and profession, working for newspapers and magazines, and had never written a book. But when I sit down to write this story based on all the notes that I had kept in my phone on pilgrimage, it looked to me like chapters in a book. And so that evolved into a new dimension of communication for me. But beyond that, I think about the project that I'm working on now, that where I'm dealing with something that I call chronic rest deficit. That is not depression and it's not exhaustion, but it's this multi-dimensional void that I think some of us experience when we've just pushed ourselves to the limit. Those of us who can't say no to different things, we're overcommitted, we're overscheduled, and we're wired to work and we're wired to do things. And a couple of months ago, I had this moment where I just imploded. It was just an implosion of my mind and my body and my spirit and my heart. And I really began to think about that and assess what that meant, because at 55 years old, I'm at a point in my life where I want to make a difference for the kingdom, right? I don't want to be the guy who's sitting in the chair crying and wonders what the heck's wrong with him. And so I began to think back to the time. I always take a couple of weeks in December before the end of the year, and I think about the past and I think about the future and where I was and where I'm going. And I began to think about this bucket concept that you and I have talked about. And, if we think about what Jesus said, he said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, right? Here's how I think about these 4 buckets, and how some people carry water in places where where they don't really have a water supply, and they're carrying this yoke on their shoulders, right? You got 2 buckets here, 2 buckets here. They've got to be balanced. They got to be balanced for that yoke to work. So what I discovered in my life, and I call this, I think God designs each of us extremely uniquely, but I think it's biblical, and I call it 4 benevolent callings that God gives us. And one is our gift, and one is our passion, and one is our calling, and the last one is our love. And what I discovered about myself is that when those buckets would get out of balance for me, maybe I'm pouring too much into my gift, and maybe I'm not putting enough into my love. Now, there are certain questions. I mean, we have to identify what those things are for each of us, because they're not the same for all of us. And there are certain questions I think we can ask ourselves to determine what those buckets are for us. But that's what I discovered for myself, is that I have to be very intentional in my life. For example, if there's a deficit in my love bucket, that probably means that I'm not spending enough time with my wife and my kids. And I need to be intentional about that. And my kids are young adults now, so that's not as easy as it used to be. And so I try to have at least, at the very minimum, a monthly get together where we all get together at one of our favorite places and eat, and everything's on me, and we just have a really great time. So we could talk about each one of those. We don't have time to, but there's an assessment that we'll talk about later, maybe, that we can send out, and people can kind of measure their proclivity to what I call chronic rest deficit.
So, Steve, chronic rest deficit, you were talking about if you have a deficit in the love area. How do you know, though? Like, we don't need to talk about purpose and gift and love and explore that right now. But how do you know, Steve, when a deficit is happening?
Boy, that's a great question. I knew it. I knew it most recently because I had been investing myself in, and I am one of those people. I have, if on the 40-point assessment, I probably score yes on 39 of them. I stay busy. I do a lot. I'm active physically, and I've got a 30-hour-a-week job plus a couple of side hustles, and we try to write books, and we try to make an impact for the kingdom as we can in the publishing world. But there was a moment, a specific moment in time a couple of months ago, when I literally came home one day and couldn't walk up the stairs. And I'm wondering what is wrong with me. I finally made it up, got in my chair, and I'm sitting there crying for no reason. I don't even know why, and I guess it's, for me, I know a bucket is out of line when my life begins to unravel like that. And it's not pretty. And I'm getting better at it. I've always been one of those people say, love yourself. And I've never really understood that. And I've never really been good at that. I'm wired to serve, and I don't mean that in some, I don't mean that in any way in particular. It's just serving and giving and work brings me joy. Mm-hmm. But you can take it too far, right? We do have to take care of ourselves. And for me, it was the discovery of this analogy of the buckets. And maybe it's not just my love. I mean, maybe I'm not pouring enough into my passion. Here's what I realized about my passion is that my passion was actually hospitality and cooking and feeding people, big groups of people, and bringing together in community around a table. And I have a big garden here in Arkansas, and I love to give produce away. So maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not investing enough in that. But I begin to realize it when things just kind of start to get weird. And I'm sorry that I can't be more definitive than that.
No, and I think no one's asking you to give like the masterful answer, because we're really all different. I mean, Steve, I call them smoke alarms. When
Very
smoke
cool.
alarms are going off, and a lot of it has to do with my physical body. When I can't get up the steps, or my joints start to hurt, or my mind is racing, those are signals. Those are smoke alarms that our buckets are out of order. So Steve, I want the Fearless family, like, we're all about practical here. We love to help you with the spiritual, but we also want to help you with the practical as well. And you've developed a 40-point assessment to find out, could you possibly be dealing with chronic rest deficit? So friends, we've made it super easy for you. All you have to do, look at Steve. He's so kind. He made the word fearless. Text 55444 and text fearless to that number, and he will put you on his email subscriber list, and he will send you the 40-point assessment. Who doesn't like a little assessment just to check and see where you're at? Steve, tell us a little bit about what this assessment looks like, and how much time will it take them to do it?
40 points. You answer. It's a simple answer, yes or no, to each one of those 40 points. At the bottom is a scale, like 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and so on and so forth. That really just, and I think it's important to emphasize too, Christy. Look, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just an average guy out there in the world who has experienced this and who feels like it's something that's very real. And quite honestly, in the process of putting a new book together that I hope we'll have out there one of these days. I've interviewed a handful of people who are fascinating individuals, both men and women, and to hear their stories and how they have learned, they've accepted that this is who they are, because it is a part of their unique design to be the way that they are, and they've learned to manage it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking forward to telling those stories in the book, but it won't take more than 5 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes to take this assessment. And in my own mind, I can just see people taking it, shaking their heads, saying, yep.
Yep, that's me. That's me. That's me. I personally can't wait to take it. I'm going to text the number myself so that I can get the assessment. And friends, I get Steve's Sunday shares, and he just sends out something every Sunday, and it's very helpful. It's fun, and you're going to want to be on his email subscriber list, because it's just, and you're going to want to take this assessment. I'm going to take it. I'm going to share it with the girls in the community too. So let's all take the assessment together. Hey, Steve, why don't you end with telling us one practical tip that you do to help overcome anxiety?
To overcome anxiety. During the last, well, here's the thing, I guess, more practically. And I think this is common among, and it's one of the points in the assessment. I think people that are prone to anxiety, people that are prone to depression, people that are prone to chronic rest deficit, there is a need for us, and it has nothing to do with our family or our friends or anyone else in our life, but we have this intrinsic need to get away and be alone with ourselves and think more deeply than we might normally think, be a little more introspective than we might normally be. And ultimately, if as I have done with the 4 buckets, think about how to be more intentional in my life. I think that's a big problem in the world today, is that so many, we kind of expect all the answers to come to us. And it's just not that way. If we want to make a difference in the kingdom, if we want to make a difference for our family, if we want to make a difference for the people we love, I think it's so important for us to be intentional in what we do And I think a lot of that can come from, even if it's just, and I know it's hard for some people, but even if it's just a couple of hours on a Saturday afternoon to get away and spend some time alone with ourselves and with God and in prayer, or whatever it needs to be for you.
That's good. That's good. I think that we think we don't have time to get away, but it's when we make that time that purpose and that passion and those buckets actually start to balance back out again. So friends, I hope that you'll take Steve's advice this week. Would you take some time for yourself? Will you get away? Will you journal? Will you pray? Will you spend time with God? Because we saw those renewals and those pit stops, those pauses in the life of Jesus all the time. He always got off. He would be hustling. They would be healing people, doing all kinds of conferences, if you will. And then he would get off and he would go and be alone. And hey, man, if Jesus needed to pause, how much more do we need to pause?
Amen.
So friends, I hope you've enjoyed the little interview with Steve here today. Please go text him. Text 55444 and then put the word fearless in there. You're going to get added to a Sunday shares, and then you're also going to get the chronic rest deficit assessment to find out if you are chronically running low on rest. And I cannot wait to hear what the answers are going to be with everybody. Steve, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate you and look forward to the new book coming out. And thanks for being here today, Steve. Bye,
Great,
fearless
Steve.
friends.
Thanks for having me on.
Really hope that you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. We can't wait to bring you more fearless content.